He was 12 the first time someone told him he was getting ideas above his station. It happened in the queue outside a chip shop on a Friday night, rainwater running along the curb in greasy little streams, everybody cold and half-cross because payday was still a few days off. Daniel's mum had sent him down for 2 portions of chips and a battered sausage if they still had any left. He was wearing his school blazer because it was the only coat he had that still fit over his jumper, and tucked under one arm was a library book about architecture he had borrowed that afternoon because he liked the pictures of clean houses with wide windows and quiet kitchens. A man 2 places behind him, red-faced and loud in the way some men get when they've had enough lager to feel clever, nodded at the book and said, "What's that then? Going posh on us?" A few people laughed. Daniel laughed too, because when you're 12 and standing in your own postcode, you learn early that sometimes joining in is cheaper than explaining yourself. The men grinned and added, "Careful, lad. You'll start wanting table manners next." More laughter. Daniel went home with the chips going cold through the paper and the book tucked tighter under his arm than before. He said nothing to his mum. There was no point. She would have told him not to mind idiots, which was true and not useful. His dad, if he'd been in, would have said something about not forgetting where you came from, which sounded noble but often meant don't make people uncomfortable by wanting more than they've settled for. The thing was, Daniel didn't want marble floors or a sports car or any of the shiny things people talked about when they mocked middle-class types. What he wanted, even then, was smaller and somehow bigger at the same time. He wanted a house where the shouting didn't start before tea. He wanted a hallway that didn't smell faintly of damp socks and old cigarettes. He wanted a kitchen table people actually sat at. He wanted to grow up into a man his future children didn't have to manage. At 12, he wouldn't have put it like that. He just knew he was already tired of certain sounds. The scrape of his father's key against the front door when he was coming in later than promised. The sudden silence between his parents that usually meant the loud bit was still on its way. The way men on the estate laughed at anything that looked like effort if it wasn't physical. They were not the poorest family on the street, and Daniel knew enough even then to understand that. There was always somebody worse off. Somebody with no heating. Somebody with social services at the door. Somebody whose older brother had gone away for a bit and whose mum kept saying he was working in Scotland. But not the worst is a thin sort of comfort when you're a child and the house feels permanently braced. His father, Terry, worked when work was available and sulked when it wasn't. Laboring, mostly. Warehouses, roofing, site clearances, agency shifts. He was not an evil man. Daniel would resist that lie all his life because it was too easy and not true. Terry could be funny. He could make a room laugh, sing old songs loudly, fix a gutter with 2 tools and a swear word. He also drank more than he should, hated being corrected, and wore disappointment like an accusation. If life had given him less than he thought he deserved, somebody nearby usually ended up paying for the mood. Daniel's mother, Sheila, kept the house going through force of ordinary endurance. School dinners, cleaning jobs, a few early morning shifts at a care home, cash folded into old envelopes at the back of drawers. She was sharp in ways his father wasn't. Quick with sums, quicker with people's motives. She could stretch mints, calm creditors, and spot trouble on a boy's face before he spoke. But she was tired, and tired people cannot always protect what they see. Daniel learned young that your life can narrow through repetition. 1 bad year becomes 2. 1 dropped standard becomes the house standard. 1 wrong crowd becomes simply the lads you know. He was 13 when his cousin Ryan tried to recruit him into the first of several bad decisions. "Easy money," Ryan said, leaning on the railings behind the off-license, all 17 years old and already carrying himself like a man who'd seen too much and learned the wrong lessons from all of it. "Bloke up the industrial estate, leaves copper pipe in the back lockup. In and out. Nobody saying rob a bank." Daniel knew what "easy money" meant in Ryan's mouth. It meant danger flattened into banter. "What for?" Daniel asked. Ryan gave him a look. "For money, obviously." Daniel shrugged. "I mean, what do you need me for?" "Small hands. Smaller build. Don't go all shy on me now." There it was. The challenge hidden inside the offer. Don't be soft. Don't act above it. Don't think too hard. Daniel wanted the money. That was the annoying part. He wanted new trainers. He wanted to stop pretending his PE kit was in the wash when really the shirt was too short and the shorts had gone shiny at the seams. He wanted, for once, to bring cash on a school trip without his mum saying, "We'll see," in that voice that meant no. Instead he said, "Nah." Ryan snorted. "Mummy's good boy." Maybe. That answer saved him twice over. Once from the actual theft, and once from the need to explain later why he had gone against his own instincts just to be liked by somebody who was already half lost. Ryan got caught 2 weeks later with another lad from down the road. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to get their names known and their future options reduced before either of them understood what that meant. Daniel watched all that and felt something harden quietly in him. Not judgment exactly. More like decision. He didn't think he was better than the people around him. He thought he wanted a different ending. School helped, though not in the romantic way people like to say later. It wasn't that teachers saw something special. Most of them were too busy or too worn down to perform miracles. But one or two mattered. Mr. Hargreaves, who taught history and wore the same 3 ties on rotation, once kept Daniel back after class because his essay was too good for the effort he was pretending to make. "If you're going to coast, do it less obviously," he said. Daniel thought he was in trouble. "Sorry, sir. I'm not asking for an apology. I'm asking whether you're lazy or cautious." Daniel blinked. "What?" Mr. Hargreaves stacked papers slowly. "Some clever boys from places like this learn to underperform so nobody notices them trying. I find it irritating." It was such an odd, direct thing to say that Daniel remembered it for years. Cautious. That was exactly it. Trying too hard could get you laughed at where he came from. It could make you visible in the wrong way. It could sound like betrayal. After that, Daniel started letting himself do well more openly. Not all at once. He still pretended not to care around the wrong people. Still rolled his eyes at homework in the yard and used words like whatever when he got marks back. But he worked. Quietly, then less quietly. He stayed in the library some afternoons. Took the free revision guides when offered. Sat near the front in maths after realizing no one actually dies from being called keen. His father hated what he called Daniel's attitude through those years, though he could never define it properly. Always reading. Always indoors. Talks like he's better than everyone now. He said these things while Daniel was washing up or tying his little sister's shoelaces or minding his own business with a coursework book open. Daniel learned another lesson from that: some people hear aspiration as criticism, even when you haven't mentioned them at all. By 16 he had good enough GCSEs to stay on and do A-levels at the college in town, which already felt like movement. Most of the lads he knew either dropped out, drifted into whatever work came up, or talked big about apprenticeships they never applied for. Daniel nearly followed one of them. Money was bad that year. Worse than usual. His father hurt his shoulder and spent months angry with pain, which was somehow everybody else's fault. Sheila picked up more shifts. Daniel started working Saturdays at a builder's merchant, loading bags of plaster and learning that men will trust you faster if you say less and work hard. At one point it seemed obvious he should leave school after GCSEs and earn full-time. His mum wanted the money. His dad wanted the money. The sensible version of the family story certainly wanted the money. Daniel wanted it too. He was tired of watching his mum calculate food in her head. Then came another fork. The manager at the builder's merchant, Alan, called him into the office one Saturday and offered him more hours. Full-time from summer if he wanted it. Reliable lad, good with customers, doesn't stand around uselessly. High praise from Alan, who spoke like compliments had to be taxed. Daniel almost said yes on the spot. Instead he asked if he could think about it. Alan shrugged. Thinking's allowed. That evening Daniel took the longer walk home and tried to be honest with himself. Full-time money would help now. It would also make staying easy. And easy, he was beginning to understand, was one of the most expensive words in the world. When he told his mum he wanted to stay on at college, she didn't speak for a few seconds. Then she said, "We'll manage." There was relief in her voice, and pride, and worry enough for all three of them. His father called him soft. That stung less than it once would have. College widened things. Not magically. He wasn't suddenly among future cabinet ministers and cello players. It was a local sixth-form college mostly full of tired teenagers in fake confidence and second-hand coats. But it was mixed in a way his school hadn't been. Some kids had parents who used words like networking without irony. Some had bedrooms bigger than Daniel's whole downstairs. Some had simply grown up in houses where adults spoke to each other without trying to win. He noticed all of it. At first, he noticed it badly. Too aware of his accent, his shoes, the lunch he brought from home wrapped in foil. He hated how quickly he could sort people by class without meaning to. Worse, he hated how quickly they could sort him. He made mistakes. Said less than he should. Laughed at jokes he didn't find funny. Once pretended he knew how skiing worked because a girl in sociology asked where his family usually went and he panicked before answering, Blackpool, if things are going really well. The girl laughed, not cruelly. Fair enough. He felt stupid for a full day anyway. Then he met Ben and Imogen. Ben wore the same navy jumper too often and talked like he'd been born apologizing for being tall. His dad was an accountant, his mum a GP, and yet Ben was one of the least smug people Daniel had ever met. Imogen came from what Daniel privately thought of as proper house people, bookshelves, dinner parties, phrases like, my parents are in Provence this week, said with no awareness of their absurdity, but she was funny, direct, and incapable of pretending not to notice when someone was being talked down to. Neither of them treated Daniel like a project. That helped. Through them, he learned things nobody in his family could have taught him because they had never been shown them either. How to write a decent email that didn't sound like a hostage note. How to shake hands properly. That saying thank you mattered less than noticing when thanks were due. That etiquette wasn't napkins and soup spoons so much as making other people comfortable without becoming fake yourself. He watched, copied, adjusted. Not to become someone else exactly. More to become a version of himself that could move through more rooms without feeling like an intruder. That mattered later, though it also made him uneasy. He was always alert to the risk of becoming performative. Becoming one of those men who sands down every rough edge until they are presentable and empty. University never quite happened. Daniel got the grades, but the money and timing didn't line up cleanly, and by then he had started to see another path. He took an entry-level role at a regional insurance firm in Manchester, claims administration, dull on paper, decent prospects if you stayed useful and out of trouble. It wasn't his dream because he didn't have a dream in the singular. He had a direction. Upward, but steady. Better walls. Better habits. Better choices repeated until they looked like a life. He was 19 when he started there, commuting in cheap shirts that never fitted quite right at the neck. Most of the office bored him at first. The fluorescent lighting. The fake urgency. The petty politics over biscuits and meeting rooms. But Daniel had an advantage people underestimated. He knew how to work. Not talk about work. Actually work. He turned up on time, listened properly, learned systems fast, and did not act offended by tasks below his title because he had grown up around real labor and knew the difference between status and effort. Managers noticed. So did the good people. That part mattered more than luck, though luck was in it too. One decent supervisor can alter a career almost by accident. His was a woman called Priya Shah who ran the claims team with the exact mixture of patience and intolerance he responded to. She was the first person at work to tell him that being reliable is useful but not enough if you want to move. You hide behind competence, she said during one of his early reviews. He frowned. Isn't competence the point? It is. But if you want the better work, you need to stop acting like being noticed is suspicious. That line hit him because she was right. He still had that old instinct from school, from the estate, from his father's house, do well, but don't make a spectacle of trying. It had kept him safe. It would not help him rise. So he started saying yes to the harder bits. Process projects nobody wanted. Extra qualifications done at night. Presentations that made him feel physically ill for an hour beforehand. He watched how senior people behaved, then stole only the useful parts. Clarity. Restraint. Good manners under pressure. He ignored the posturing. In his early 20s, there were other forks. A mate from school, Darren, rang him out of nowhere one evening and suggested a little side earner involving insurance referrals and staged claims. Nothing massive. Just smart money, he called it, the way fools always rename risk when trying to recruit company. Daniel said no so quickly Darren laughed. You've gone straight-laced. Maybe. You think that office lot care about you? No. That's why I'm not getting sacked over you. Another time, a team leader at work quietly hinted that if Daniel massaged certain internal numbers before review time, everybody in the team would look stronger and nobody would be harmed because these things wash out over the year. Daniel declined that too, though more carefully. He had seen enough by then to know wrongdoing in offices usually arrived dressed as common sense. Each decision cost him something in the moment. Easy money. Faster favor. A chance to belong to the cynical older crowd who called everybody else naive. But every no also made the next one easier. That was the real climb, more than promotions. Not one dramatic moral victory. Just refusing enough bad shortcuts that your life slowly stops being built around them. By 25 he was earning enough to help his mum replace the ancient boiler that had spent his childhood making winter feel personal. He bought his first decent suit. Moved into a rented flat with clean carpets and windows that shut properly. Dated a woman called Laura, who was a primary school teacher and had the sort of calm he at first mistook for softness until he realized it was strength without performance. Laura mattered because she saw what he wanted before he could articulate it well. Not riches. Not status for its own sake. Order. Safety. A household that did not run on dread. Once, when they were looking at furniture in a shop far too expensive for them, Daniel ran his hand over a dining table and said, almost joking, "One day I just want a place where everybody sits down properly." Laura looked at him. That's not a weird thing to want. He loved her a bit for saying that like it was obvious. They married when he was 27 in a small ceremony that cost less than some of their friends' stag weekends. By then Daniel was a team manager and quietly being lined up for more. He still saw Ben and Imogen now and then, still met the lads from home when schedules allowed, though the distance with some of them had become permanent in the soft, unavoidable way of adult life. His father came to the wedding in a suit that didn't sit right on him and cried during the speeches while pretending he had something in his eye. He and Daniel were better by then, though never simple. Age had worn some sharpness off Terry. Ill health had worn some pride away too. They had reached that uneasy peace many men reach with their fathers when there is too much history for ease and not enough time left for war. At 29, Daniel signed the papers on a 3-bedroom semi in sale with a small garden, a sensible mortgage, and a kitchen table they chose for sturdiness rather than trend. He and Laura were expecting their first child by then. Not far along, still early enough to be careful with hope, but real. The day they got the keys, the house smelled of old paint and somebody else's plug-in air freshener. The carpets were ugly. The bathroom tiles looked tired. The back gate stuck halfway. Daniel stood in the empty living room with a ring of keys in his palm and felt a strange pressure in his throat. Laura laughed gently. "Don't cry yet. We haven't seen the boiler." He smiled, but he did cry a bit later. Not in some grand cinematic way. Just briefly, alone in what would become the spare room and then the nursery, with one hand over his mouth like he was embarrassed even there. Because this was it, or close enough to count. Not perfection. Not luxury. Not a life free from bills or grief or ordinary future trouble. But clean walls. A stable address. A door his children would not dread hearing open at night. A home built more from choices than from damage. He thought then of the chip shop Q years earlier, of the men making jokes about him going posh, as if wanting decency were somehow a betrayal. He thought of Ryan and Darren and every little invitation life had offered him to become someone easier, faster, rougher. He thought of his mother saying, "We'll manage." Of Mr. Hargreaves asking if he was lazy or cautious. Of Priya telling him reliability alone would not move him. Of Ben showing him how to write to people without apologizing for existing. Of Laura understanding that wanting a proper table was not about furniture. People make class sound like a costume sometimes. Or a judgment. Or a set of tastes you can buy in a weekend if you pick the right sofa and start saying actually more often. Daniel knew better. For him, moving from working class to middle class had not meant rejecting where he came from or pretending hardship made him picturesque. It had meant taking the best parts with him: resilience, humor, work ethic, loyalty when deserved, and refusing the traps that came bundled Bess.